times I've played that music,
Well,
but
okay.
that's mine.
Hamilton the musical, Chris.
Carry On Camping. I was 5 years old. Mum and Dad took us to our first ever movie, Barbara Windsor. What I loved about it was I learnt parts of the anatomy I'd never seen before, but it was more my parents' reaction when they realised that we've really taken our kids to the wrong movie.
Carry On Camping. Thank you very much for Hamilton. Kua mutu te hōtaka mō tēnei rā, kia pai, tō koutou pō. The programme, that's us. Georgie, Chris, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Back tomorrow.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, multiple stabbings at a Dunedin supermarket. 3 people have critical injuries. We'll bring you the latest. Unions fume over the government's call for a pay freeze ahead of a crunch meeting with the Prime Minister. There's money in the kitty, but the Finance Minister says don't expect a spending spree. Why was a young mental health patient discharged from hospital shortly before his death? Backroom technology is one of the things holding up the rollout of DIY cervical screening. 6 months on from the Napier floods, 20 families are still without a roof over their heads. Precious Milford, the Kakapo, loses the tip of his toe.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. An eyewitness to a multiple stabbing at a central Dunedin supermarket this afternoon says the attacker was disarmed by people in the store, including staff. 3 injured people are now in Dunedin Hospital's intensive care unit. The Southern DHB says 5 people have been treated in total. 1 is in a general ward and 1 is being treated in the emergency department. 1 person has been taken into custody. Tim Brown is at the scene in Cumberland Street.
Other witnesses have described seeing a lot of blood, while another believes the attacker was having a psychotic episode. 2 of the injured are staff members. The store manager says everybody is shocked and staff are deeply upset that customers who tried to help their colleagues were also injured. More details are expected shortly in a police media briefing. Court Timothy Brown, TNA.
A man who was in Countdown when an attacker stabbed members of the public and staff says the incident was terrifying. The man, who asked not to be named, says he can't get what happened out of his head.
I heard screaming, and first I just ignored. I thought it was just kids playing around, and it was quite sharp screaming, and then I heard the shelf falling down. Then we saw this woman. She was walking, blood, full of blood on her face. I think she was stabbed on her forehead or something. Can't believe it happened in Dunedin. Just can't believe.
The Prime Minister says there is nothing to suggest the stabbing was a terror attack or that more than 1 person was involved. Speaking at her regular post-cabinet media conference a short time ago, Jacinda Ardern acknowledged the courageous acts of bystanders who took action. She says the attack is hugely concerning but does not appear to be a national security incident.
I am advised, and I do caveat that this is early stages, I am advised that at this stage there is nothing to suggest from the police's perspective that this is what they would define as a domestic terror event.
The police are not looking for any other suspects at this stage. Nearly 2,500 more migrant workers will be allowed into the country for seasonal horticultural work in time for next summer's harvest. The government has announced it will set aside 500 rooms in managed isolation hotels every fortnight for certain groups. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the Trans-Tasman bubble has freed up the rooms. The extra spaces will go to about 300 RSE workers every month from June for the next 10 months. Another 300 specialised construction workers will take up rooms between June and October, and 400 foreign students next month. There'll also be rooms for 100 refugees every 6 weeks from July. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
The Migrant Workers Association says the government should grant residency to long-term migrant workers and overstayers. A pathway to residency petition with 15,000 signatures has been presented to Parliament. The association's president, Anu Kaloti, says migrant workers' visas should also be detached from a single employer to prevent exploitation.
We know that we have a government in place that has an international reputation, image of being very kind and compassionate. So we just request that the migrants are also given a small percentage of that compassion.
Anu Kaloti says the government should also make it clear whether workers stranded overseas will be able to return and when they can do so. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. All Blacks winger Caleb Clark has confirmed he's put his hand out for selection in New Zealand's Olympic Rugby Sevens team for the Tokyo Games, which rules him out of the start of the All Black international season. Clark and Chiefs player Etene Nanai Seturo have returned to the Sevens program, hoping to impress Olympic selectors against Australia later this month, before another Oceania-based tournament expected in June. Sevens coach Clark Laidlaw says getting Clark back is a major boost.
You've seen in Super Rugby a lot of teams trying to shut Caleb down with 2 or 3 defenders. Now you do that in the sevens field, it creates a lot of space for other people going back the other way. So, we're quite excited around what that might look like for our game.
Meanwhile, the Highlanders are investigating an alleged assault on a woman involving a player at a Dunedin bar on Saturday night. The Highlanders won't say which player is involved, but the Otago Daily Times is reporting that it's All Black Shannon Frizzell. The police say they've received a complaint, but no arrest has been made. The Japanese Prime Minister denies he's ever put the Tokyo Olympics first. The same day, an opinion poll shows nearly 60% of Japanese people want the Games cancelled because of COVID-19. Yoshihide Suga says his priority is protecting the public, but the International Olympic Committee has the final say on whether the Games go ahead. That's the news.
Despair over access to cannabis for the chronically ill.
I'm forced into a situation where I have to break the law in order to be healthy because those protections aren't in place.
New Zealand students' web use soars.
I noticed that I couldn't focus on my schoolwork as well, and just my attention span, really.
And as China's rocket crashes into the sea, a reminder that it won't be the last.
China is planning to put up another 10 modules, and one presumes that on each occasion a similar thing will happen.
Reaching new heights. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Meat Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki and Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Generally cloudy with isolated showers. Rain developing about Waitomo, Taumaranui and Taranaki tomorrow night, possibly heavy. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa partly cloudy. Scattered rain in Wairarapa tomorrow. Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu, cloudy periods with a few showers tonight. Rain tomorrow night. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, cloudy with occasional drizzle, rain at times tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, partly cloudy tonight with a few late showers. Periods of rain tomorrow, heavy about the ranges, easing in the evening. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine with high cloud tonight, rain spreading north tomorrow, followed by showers, with snow to 600 metres in the south. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, heavy at times, easing from the south tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy, drizzle at times. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. 3 people have been critically injured in a stabbing at Countdown Supermarket in central Dunedin. Another person has moderate injuries. Police say they were called to the Cumberland Street shop about 2:30 this afternoon. They have taken one person into custody. Countdown spokesperson Kiri Hannafin joins me now. Kia ora, Kiri. This is a terrible situation.
Kia ora, Lisa. No, it absolutely is. It's a shocker.
What can you tell us?
Very little. I'm on my way down to Dunedin now, so I'm kind of just getting it as I go. But as far as I know, a customer or a person in our store stabbed 5 people, including 2 of my team, who are both very critically unwell and in the hospital at the moment. So we are just, trying to, obviously support those 2 team members and their family, and then the rest of our store who are in a lot of shock. And yes, absolutely terrible situation.
I know it's very early and you're just getting this information a little bit at a time, but Kiri, do you know what happened in the store in terms of, did the person say anything or was there an incident as such?
It looks like there was an incident, but we can't quite work out what. It was just sort of in the health and beauty area near the pharmacy. So, no, we don't really know what has gone on, I'm sorry. The police have come to the store, we've closed it down, but we really don't know what happened or how this happened.
Are you aware of whether the person was armed when they entered the store?
No, I'm sorry, I'm not aware of that.
And I know you've got 2 very ill staff at the moment, but also other people who are inside the store. What's happening with them in assistance, and how are they being looked after?
Well, we've obviously got sort of trauma support in the store, but the store is closed. I think it's still sort of so fresh, so and I'm sort of scrambling because I'm trying to get myself out of Napier to Auckland down to Dunedin. But lots of support, lots of counselling and trauma support. But really, we're just sort of focused on the injured team.
Kitty, the managing director of Countdown has said that, well, you've had some concerns about escalating violence and aggression directed at staff. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so we've been having just, I think I've probably talked to you about it before, Lisa, like sort of maybe 13 or 14 months worth of increasing violence towards our team, 600% increase during COVID, and about 300% since. Just the most horrendous verbal abuse, physical abuse. On Thursday night, someone tried to burn down our store in Henderson while our team were working in it. So it's just, it's unacceptable violence. And now this is just, it's just incredibly distressing for our customers to be injured in the process as well. That we can't seem to do enough to keep our people safe. Just, takes my breath away. I've got no words really. I'm so sorry. I don't really know what to say apart from it's a shocker.
I understand it's a pretty traumatic time for you and your team at the moment. When you talk about that escalating aggression, do you have any clues to what's driving it?
Yeah, we think about that a lot because obviously we're putting everything we can into dealing with it because it's as I say it's been increasing and increasing, and the problem is we can't really kind of find out a pattern or work out the pattern. It happens mostly during the day, in some areas more than others. When we have guards, it doesn't seem to make a difference. It's not sort of particular to any sort of socio-economic demographic. It's not particular to alcohol or drugs or mental health. It's just sort of all of the time. And I guess the verbal abuse, which is the one that we see the most of, but, this is, very aggressive homophobic or racial abuse happens in nearly every single one of our stores, nearly every single day. In fact, every day we have assaults in our store of some variety. So seems to be no rhyme or reason apart from a complete disregard and lack of respect for our people.
Do you have security at all your stores, Kitty?
Most stores, yes. Some stores, we don't need it at all, which is a blessing. But most of many of our stores, we have security all of the time.
Do you know if the Dunedin store at the centre of this situation has security staff?
I don't believe it did, but I don't know. Sorry, Lisa, off by heart. It certainly does now, but I don't think it did today.
Okay. Kitty, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us at this time. That is Kitty Hannafin, who is the spokesperson for Countdown. And as you heard her say there, she's rushing down to Dunedin where this incident has taken place. Well, Arthur Taylor was about to walk into the supermarket to do his evening shop when he was stopped in his tracks by what he saw.
It was a beautiful sunny Monday afternoon here in Dunedin, Lisa, and I was just going off to get buy some groceries for tonight's supper, and just about to go into the Countdown in Cumberland Street, and the police station's right next door. In peels a police car with all the bells and whistles going, red and blue lights flashing and siren going, and I thought, Jesus, what's going on here? Of course, thoughts came back to me immediately of some of my past life, and then they peeled in there, and it turned out with some more police cars kept arriving, ambulances. They took a guy out covered in blood. Apparently it's not his own blood. Carted him off somewhere. He was the offender, alleged offender, I should say, at this stage. And it just got more hectic from there on.
Arthur, did you see the man that they brought out?
Just a glimpse of him. Yeah, because by that stage they were moving us back and more police had arrived.
Was he saying anything?
It was mummy, but I couldn't actually hear what he was actually saying.
You said he had blood on him?
Yep, had quite a bit of blood on him, yes. And from what I understand now, wasn't his own blood.
Can you remember what he was wearing?
Nah, I can't. Honestly, it was just so much started unfolding really quickly,
Did you see anyone else come out who appeared to be injured?
Well, I saw, and I've got the video of it because I started videoing at that point. 2 people carried away, ambulances, 2 people on stretchers taken away in ambulances. They brought them out the supermarket, put them on stretchers, put them in the ambulance, and off they went. Yeah, 2 at least.
Were they walked out, Arthur, or were they?
No, they were on stretchers. St John and the ambulances were there. Yeah.
So to be clear, you saw 2 people taken away on stretchers and they were not able to walk out of the supermarket on their own?
I've actually got the video of it because I thought it might, because not obviously the police were pretty hectic doing their job, so it might come in handy with some of the inquiries later on, I don't know.
Was the supermarket evacuated? What was going on?
Yes, there was no one there. I don't know if there might have still been people there because they were keeping us back at that stage. But I didn't see anyone coming and going out of the supermarket, just police officers and countdown staff.
What noise could you hear, if anything, coming from the supermarket?
Couldn't really hear anything. Couldn't really hear anything because the supermarket's quite a big place, the Cumberland one. It's the main countdown in Dunedin. There were a couple of detectives walking the streets, running around the streets as we drove out of there, obviously checking for other offenders or something, or vehicles or whatever.
As far as you could tell, Arthur, the police's attention was on a single person, one person.
Yes, that was on their attention. But they were questioning everybody, as to...
We are cutting away from this interview now to go to Dunedin, where Superintendent Paul Basham is about to talk to the media about the stabbing at Countdown this afternoon.
Paul Basham is my name and I am the District Commander for Southern District. I will read a prepared statement and then I'm happy to take questions. Just before 2:30pm today, emergency services received the first of many phone calls reporting a number of people had received stab wounds inside the Countdown supermarket on Cumberland Street in Dunedin here, just next door to the police station. Police staff were on site within minutes, and upon arrival, police located 4 people with serious stab-related injuries. We also located a man who we believe was allegedly responsible for the incident, and he had been detained by members of the public prior to police arrival. This was a fast-moving and extremely traumatic event for every person in the supermarket. For the victims who were stabbed, for those who were present who tried to intervene, and those who had to flee to a place of safety. While we are satisfied we have the person responsible for the assault in our custody, we are in the very early stages of this investigation into what took place. This includes understanding the motivation for the attack, which will be a key component of the investigation. However, on the face of what we currently know, we believe this was a random attack. We believe this was a random attack. The scene is currently being locked down and will be the subject of an extensive scene examination over the next couple of days. While we are in the process of compiling witness information, we are also collecting CCTV footage. The alleged offender is currently receiving medical attention in Dunedin Public Hospital. He is under police guard there and is yet to be formally spoken to and charged. We would encourage anyone who has information, including video footage of this incident, to get in touch with the police via the 105 number and quote the incident in Dunedin Countdown. Thank you.
Do we have an update on the medical conditions of those stabbed?
We have 4 victims, 3 of which are described as being status 1, and my latest briefing was that 3 are going into surgery this afternoon, and I don't have an update on that at this point, but hope to have an update later in the evening.
How did the offender sustain injuries?
It was a minor injury that took place during the incident.
Is he known to you?
I can't comment on that. This matter is likely to be before the courts tomorrow, and as such, I'm unable to comment any further directly around the offender.
In connection with this matter?
The investigation is in the very early stages, but clearly we'll be doing a lot of background inquiries into this alleged offender and his local living conditions.
What would you say about those people that tried to detain him while they waited for police to arrive?
Oh look, it's nothing short of heroic. I have, before I came to speak to you this afternoon, viewed the CCTV footage, which is quite traumatic, and what I can say is that those that intervened, some of who became injured themselves, I think, have acted selflessly and with great courage to prevent this man from hurting anybody else, and indeed I think they did just that.
Did he go into the countdown armed?
We don't know that at this stage.
Was there any staff members that were involved in helping detain the man?
It's very early stages. We're trying to make sense of that in terms of the witnesses that we're speaking to and understanding what took place, but I can't rule that out at this stage.
Did this specifically take place inside the pharmacy in Countdown? Is that the main area of interest?
I believe that the incident was adjacent to the pharmacy area in the supermarket, yes.
Was he seeking service from that pharmacy?
I don't know that.
Do you know if any students or young people were victims in the attack?
Again, very, very early stages in the investigation. We're dealing with it was a busy supermarket. There are a lot of people in there. We're seeking to establish the identity of our victims, get in touch with their next of kin, and of course we're also looking to identify all the other witnesses that were either in the car park, inside the building, or may have been involved in any other way.
Did the proximity of emergency services to the incident help in the response?
Undoubtedly, but I think the credit goes to the members of the public that acted heroically to try and prevent this offender from causing any more serious harm.
He was wearing a t-shirt that said Sons of Anarchy New Zealand. Is there any significance in that?
I can't comment on it. I don't know that.
Was the man a vagrant?
As I said, I can't really make any direct comment in relation to the alleged offender.
Has he been formally charged yet?
He's currently at the Dunedin Public Hospital receiving treatment for his injuries. We've got a team down there, obviously talking to others, and I expect, depending on when he's sent to the hospital, he'll come back to the police station here tonight, and he will be formally charged this evening or first thing tomorrow and appear in the Dunedin court tomorrow morning if all things goes to plan.
What sort of charges are like?
Well, at this stage, it's a serious stabbing, so it's at a minimum wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. God forbid that the status of those victims deteriorates overnight, and then we would be looking at something else, but let's hope that's not the case.
Is there additional security at any other supermarkets?
I don't know that. That's a question to have to direct to the Countdown franchise, but certainly we're in contact with the local manager and we are making contact with the franchise across the country. They'll make their own decisions about that.
Was there any contact with the government? Obviously, the Prime Minister made comments at her press conference this afternoon.
No, I can't comment on that. I don't know anything about that.
Was there a police dog involved? We saw a police dog and handler at the scene. Was the dog used in helping to detain this man?
No, not to my knowledge. It would have just been normal that for an incident of this nature, a police dog handler would have been making his way there.
And that was Superintendent Paul Basham speaking in Dunedin there about the Countdown stabbing. If you're just joining us, he said that the actions of the members of the public who detained the alleged offender was nothing short of heroic. He said some of those people were injured during their attempts to detain the man. He says he viewed the CCTV footage before he came to the supermarket. He said it was traumatic and it was a selfless acts of great courage in detaining that particular person. The identity of the victims is not yet known. 3 people are undergoing surgery. He has also said that it was a fast-moving, traumatic incident for the victims, for the people who attempted to detain the man, and for those who were forced to flee. Early stages of the investigation, he says, they will be looking at and trying to understand the motivations of the individual, but at the moment he has described it as a random attack. The man, the alleged offender, is at the hospital, has minor injuries after being detained, has yet to be formally charged or interviewed. We will keep you up to date with developments there. It is almost 23 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It could be chilly when the Prime Minister meets with the union tomorrow in their first face-to-face since the government announced a 3-year pay freeze for public servants. Some workers are furious about the directive that means those in public sector earning more than $60,000 will only get a pay rise in exceptional circumstances. Now, we're talking police, nurses and teachers, to name a few. Both the Prime Minister and her Finance Minister have today been defending the move by insisting it's not a freeze and it's still possible for workers to get a bump dampen pay by moving up salary bands. Well, joining me now is the President of the PSA, Benedict Ferguson. Good evening, Benedict. What are you hoping to achieve with this meeting tomorrow?
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. Hoping that the Prime Minister will be listening to what we've been saying in our open letter to her recently, and to listen to what our members are saying. We've been inundated with our members coming to us by email, text, the works, just horrified at the stance of the government. It feels like a kick in the guts for the hard work we've done over the last year, keeping our borders safe, keeping New Zealand going through this pandemic. So tomorrow we're hoping the Prime Minister will listen to us. Seems like there has been a bit of a change in their tone over the last day with the communication from her stand-up today. And we're hoping that they will come out and change their position, and hoping that those guidelines will be changed.
So you want them to back down, basically?
Back down, change, amend. I'm hoping to go in discussion with that tomorrow. But yeah, we do firmly believe they need to be changed in order to allow us to go into bargaining for our members.
Okay, so your open letter says you don't think that the pay guidance is lawful, right? So is it an option for you to take it to court and get it reviewed in some way, a judicial review?
It's always an option. We're probably going to discuss things tomorrow with the Prime Minister and probably leave that to our lawyers to follow up on that side of it. But yeah, we have a view that may not be in accordance with the Public Service Act around setting those priorities. So
at this stage you cannot rule out the possibility that this could end up in court?
Nothing's off the table at the moment, so we'll have this meeting with the Prime Minister tomorrow. Depending on that outcome, we'll go and talk to our members. And our members, we are a member-based organisation, so it is the members who decide and our delegates who decide what our bargaining stance is or what our response will be. So we'll be going out and talking to them.
Okay. Well, you know what they've put out in terms of guidance around pay, right? So if you're making 60k plus, the chances of you getting a pay rise are very low. If you want this amended, how so? What should it say?
Want them to come in and allow each agency to bargain with us in good faith. So have some parameters, but nothing like saying that it is restrained like that. And
so what parameters would be acceptable to you?
Modest pay rises for everyone in the public service. And when we talk about modest pay rises, some of the collective agreements we have currently, they have a range of increases up to, say, 2%. So we're not talking excessive pay rises here for our lowest paid workers.
So in your view, a modest pay rise is 2% but no more?
Around that figure, but I'm not going to bargain that right now.
Okay. Yeah. So, and when you say across the board, you think that even those people on the 100k plus bracket should still be allowed to get a pay increase?
Would like to have that conversation and bargaining, and I'd probably move away from even saying a 2% pay increase to moving to more of a flat rate increase. I did hear the Prime Minister talk about that today in a media briefing around having a flat increase for members, which does bring into that equality issue that they have supported. So that's around having a flat rate increase depending on what salary you earn, and that does help out our lowest paid members a lot more.
The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have both said today that people can still move up their bands. What's wrong with that? Is she wrong when she says that?
I think there's a bit of right, bit of wrong. So some agencies do have steps in their salary system, so people do progress up steps as they go, but there are several agencies who don't have those steps yet. So it's a bit of an unknown for those how they will move up. And our experience is if there's no guaranteed step increase, often it is pushed back by the employer to say, no, we're not going to move. And these pay guidances do clearly state it will be tricky to get a pay increase, if any, for those above 60k.
What are you going to say to her tomorrow?
Give her feedback that our members have been talking to us about. So it really is that...
What's the feedback? Unless you change your position, we won't vote for you again?
Well, the general feedback is it's more a bit of a disbelief, I guess, would be my to sum it up. Just the disbelief in how a Labour government can treat the public service like this at this stage. It's hard to fathom. We worked so hard during lockdown last year. Our workers, our members did take a pay freeze last year. We're expecting something to say thank you for that, and I think there is movement there.
If they don't back away from this, well, what will the effect be? More industrial action?
Not sure about that yet, but we are in bargaining, and there's lots of different things you can do when you're bargaining, but our view is we hope the Prime Minister will take on board what our members are saying and let us go into bargaining and negotiate as we have done in the past.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's the President of the PSA, Benedict Ferguson. A Wellington father who is suing health authorities says his deceased son should not have been discharged by mental health services while he was an inpatient. Christopher Carter was found dead in his father's Wainuiomata garage in 2010. His father, John Carter's court action relates to mental health patients' rights when it comes to consenting to treatment. But coronial findings seen by Checkpoint show the Carter family had another serious concern with their son's care. Nick Trubridge reports.
It's 2010 and John Carter is in a position no father wants to be. He isn't happy with the mental health care his son Christopher is receiving, but isn't sure home is the best place for him either because of issues the family's having with a neighbour.
So we got put in this position of like being between a rock and a hard place. We had to make one of two options which were not satisfactory. Neither one was satisfactory.
Coroner's findings in the wake of Christopher Carter's death show the 23-year-old requested a discharge to his father's home. However, John Carter says he wanted to see his son put into respite care accommodation.
He really was under a compulsory inpatient treatment order. If they had understood that, then they had the option of putting him on respite, which is sort of like a halfway house between the ward and being discharged.
Christopher Carter was being treated through the Capital and Coast District Health Board's Mental Health Addictions and Disability Service. Checkpoint has been trying to find out exactly why, despite the fact he was on an inpatient order and had threatened to self-harm, Christopher was instead discharged to his father's Wainuiomata home. In a statement, Mental Health, Addiction and Intellectual Disability Service Executive Director Carla Bergquist says obligations under the Mental Health Information Privacy Code prevent her from commenting publicly about individual clients. However, she did provide some general comments which have been voiced.
External agencies have undertaken formal reviews into this care, including the Coroner and Health and Disability Commissioner, who have found the care provided to the client was reasonable in the circumstances and consistent with expected standards.
Bergquist referred Checkpoint to the coroner's findings in the wake of Christopher Carter's death. It shows health officials admitting administration errors in Christopher Carter's paper trail, though it has not accepted these errors had an impact on Christopher Carter's overall care. John Carter, on the other hand, remains adamant his son was failed by the mental health system.
It's outrageous what they did to him, but there's no acknowledgement of it from the health board. All they say is, oh, well, there was certain administrative errors, you know. There was a lot more than administrative errors. There was denial of his basic human rights.
John Carter is pressing on with his court case against the Hutt Valley and Capital and Coast District Health Boards. The Ministry of Health is listed as the third respondent in the case. The action follows a district inspector's review of Christopher's care, which found he was never asked to sign a consent form for his treatment, a mistake his clinician blamed on systemic administrative errors. The district inspector's findings revealed Christopher raised serious concerns about taking medication and sometimes actively opposed taking it. The court action seeks to make sure information supplied to mental health patients is a clear and accurate outline of their rights under the Mental Health Act. Meanwhile, Carla Bergquist says reviews of Christopher Carter's care found some administrative aspects could be improved. Changes have been made, such as better availability of information on the Mental Health Act and advocacy services, and additional staff training on the Act. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
Kia ora, e te iwi haere nei Checkpoint. Workers with frozen pay feel pretty frosty towards the government. More on this after 6. The Abuse Commission hears evidence of 5 years of systemic violence in state care. Families are still homeless after flooding in Napier 6 months ago, and the Kakapo and his tiny toe problem. Homai o whakaaro, we'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines with Susanna.
3 people critically injured in a stabbing at a Dunedin supermarket this afternoon will be having surgery shortly. The Southern DHB says 5 people have been treated and 3 are in Dunedin Hospital's intensive care unit. 1 is in a general ward and the other is being treated in the emergency department. 1 person has been taken into custody and the police say they believe it was a random attack. Superintendent Paul Basham says the suspect is receiving medical attention. A witness to the stabbing says people in the store, including staff, were able to disarm the attacker. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has acknowledged the courage of bystanders who took action. The government will allow 2,400 more migrant workers into the country for horticultural work in time for the summer season. The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says 500 rooms in managed isolation will be set aside every fortnight. About 300 RSE workers will be accommodated every month from June, 300 specialist construction workers between June and October, as well as 400 foreign students next month and 100 refugees every 6 weeks from July. The Migrant Workers Association wants the government to grant residency to long-term migrant workers and overstayers and also let workers stranded overseas know when they can return. A pathway to residency petition with 15,000 signatures has been presented to Parliament today. The association's president, Anu Kaloti, is also calling for migrant workers' visas to be detached from a single employer to stop exploitation. Maritime New Zealand has ordered Kiwi Rail to pay $335,000 over an incident on an Inter-Islander ferry. In 2019, a crew member required surgery and 15 weeks off work after slipping on inadequate floor surfacing and breaking his leg in 2 places. $250,000 will go to the Marlborough District Court to monitor tides, currents and water depths in real time due to the dangers posed by sudden changes and fast tides and currents in the Sounds. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Let's get to the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, A2 Milk. Now, they're frequently in the headlines. What's happened with them now?
Well, they've been the market darling for some time, but not today, because today they announced that they have slashed their earnings guidance and they're going to have to write down some of their assets. Now, their assets are primarily infant formula that they have been selling to China for some years, and that's how they've made their fortune. So at one point they were the biggest company on the market. They'd gone from obscurity up to number 1. Well, in August last year, the company was valued market cap around $16 billion, and today it's $5 billion. So that's a big drop. And that's partly because their market has kind of collapsed somewhat.
Is this all the people who used to cart the formula back in their suitcases after a trip here and sort of sell it off as a secondary income, like students and things like that?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
So they're not coming, and then that means that they're not selling. That channel's collapsed. But also, their Chinese market, there are people having fewer children, so less demand for infant formula. And that means that they've had to write down the value of that inventory to between $80 and $90 million. That's the inventory on hand, obviously. They've also slashed their earnings forecast by about 20%, and that their profit margin has also been slashed. So they were making between 24 and 26% as a margin, and now it's going to be between 11 and 12. So that means that they're going to be less profitable going forward, and so that didn't go well at all, and the company's share price dropped about 20% in early trading, which you would expect because that's where they've written down their guidance, 20%. It did recover towards the end of the day. I guess some people thought that it was, probably oversold, and so they ended down just about 13% to $6.62, and that also played out in our market because Fonterra, which provides fresh milk here in New Zealand for the A2 brand, and Synlait, which produces the infant formula powder, were also hit hard. Fonterra was down more than 12% and Synlait down about 6%. So overall, our market took a battering because of A2 milk's decline there. And so we fell about 0.5% to 71 points down to 12,659. And that's on a day when the Australian market hit a record high. And that's because there's a global feeling that inflation is going to remain low, and that's because the U.S. Jobs data that came out over the weekend was much weaker than expected. So overall, it should have been a great day for the markets, but it wasn't.
But someone who perhaps had a happier day, 2 degrees?
Yeah, 2 degrees, but they're not listed here yet. Yeah. They're planning to list here. They announced in March that they were hoping to list, and as a result of that, we got their financial result. So they told us today, we don't usually get 2 degrees because they aren't listed here, but they're planning to. And so they made a really big profit, up 7% on the previous year. Their earnings rose to $545 million. That's their revenue, and operating profit, I guess. Underlying profit rose 6.5%. So that's very good for this company. This is a small telco. They're not as big as Vodafone and or Spark, but they have said that their business market, the number of customers they have there, that's mobile corporate customers, has increased 20.5% over the past year. So they're doing something right. They're getting a lot more customers, although they are a smaller player, obviously. And they said that they've grown their mobile pay monthly subscribers by almost 4% and broadband subscribers by 13%. So a good result for them.
I'm sure, Nona, that will be of great interest to all the people who texted us when we did stories recently about how good their signals were, and it was across all the companies. There was a lot of people unhappy with the service they're getting from their telcos. So they'll be watching those profits very carefully.
Yes, well, we'll be really interested to see, because we'll have, a third telco listed. Vodafone, of course, being partly owned by Infotrills. We see more of their result than we used to as well.
So you gave us the market lowdown.
I did. And so the New Zealand dollar is doing actually quite well, 72.8 US cents. And 92, that's a half a cent better than it was on Friday, by the way.
Okay, half a cent.
Well, half a cent, so 72. Never mind. You know what I mean. It was 72 point whatever before. Now it's 72.8. That's nearly 73 cents. That's pretty strong. 92.7 Australian and 51.9 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with business there. And speaking of business, there's a bit more money in the kitty for next week's budget, but Grant Robertson is dialling back expectations. He's about to go on a spending spree. In a pre-budget speech in Auckland this morning, the Finance Minister made it clear the government isn't going to be able to fulfil all its promises in one budget. Our reporter Sarah Robson was there.
New Zealand's better than expected economic recovery means there's a bit more wriggle room as Grant Robertson finalises next week's budget.
There is a bit more space in our operating and capital allowances to support the recovery.
But he'll be walking a tight line, increasing spending in areas of highest need while keeping a lid on debt.
As part of this balanced approach, it's important to recognise that not all of our manifesto commitments will be able to be funded within one budget. I'll say that again for the benefit of my colleagues. Not all of our manifesto commitments will be able to be funded within one budget.
Child poverty, housing and climate change, Grant Robertson says, are complex issues that require sustained investment. And with the economic outlook still uncertain, he says the government must tread carefully.
I've indicated today that there will be some increase in the operating and capital allowances, but we also keep an eye on those levels of debt. I think it's important for me, as a responsible Minister of Finance, to get that balance right. You can make the judgment next week on whether you think I have.
Independent economist Cameron Bagri says with the books in reasonably good shape, Grant Robertson does have a few more options on the table.
There's obviously some immediate priorities in regard to poverty, housing, it all, but also trying to be fiscally responsible on the other side in regard to making sure that you're still on top of that debt trajectory looking at 10 to 15 years.
But he says next week's budget needs to lay out just how the government's plan is going to work.
Because otherwise, you're putting money on tick, you're borrowing it, but we want to make sure we're getting that payoff within the medium term in regard to successful both economic and social outcomes.
National Shadow Treasurer Andrew Bailey says the government needs to be sure the economy is on a solid footing.
We've got a little bit of ground to travel before we know that we're out of trouble in New Zealand, and that's largely driven by overseas factors. But we just need to make sure that New Zealand's economy is really going to grow, because already we've put on $40 billion worth of debt over the last 12 months.
Grant Robertson will unveil the 2021 budget at Parliament next Thursday. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It's not acceptable that backroom computer technology is what's holding up the rollout of a do-it-yourself cervical screening test, according to the clinical director of one of the largest GP cooperatives. The government's committing $53 million to making self-swabs for the HPV virus available, but not for 2 more years. The kits will mean women can do the test in the privacy of their own home, rather than advancing straight to a smear test done by a GP. According to the government, one of the reasons for the delayed rollout is the need to build and test a new computer database for the screening program. ProCare represents more than 170 general practices around Greater Auckland. Clinical Director Dr. Alan Moffat explains the difference between the new test and the current smear.
Basically, the self-test is a swab, which is just a little cotton bud at the end of a stick that you insert into the vagina and get some cells. And it's looking for a virus called human papillomavirus, because that is a virus that leads to or causes cervical cancer. There are very, very rare cases of cervical cancer that aren't related to that virus, but pretty much it accounts for the vast majority of women that go on to get cancer. So no virus, no need to have a smear. However, if the test positive for a virus, then you still need to go and have a proper smear done. So it's not a full replacement, but as a screening test, it's highly accurate and a lot less invasive than having to have a full speculum examination.
So why has everybody been having smears then, if that is in essence the second stage in the testing regime?
It's relatively new technology, although having said that, we've known now for at least 2 years that this is the gold standard internationally, and it was looked at here several years ago. I think there were both financial and some logistical reasons as to why the government hasn't adopted it. ProCare has actually written to the Minister and the Director General about, prioritising this ahead of other things, because it's a huge impact on equity to get a more accessible test to people. And they wrote back, this was earlier, might have been last year actually, they wrote back to say, well, it's not yet prioritised. And my understanding is that there are delays on the cervical screening register, which needs to be updated, and that can't be updated until the National Immunisation Register is in place, which is now the COVID Immunisation Register that will become the National Immunisation Register. And then we can have the cervical screen. Oh, and I think bowel screening is actually ahead of the cervical screening register, and then they'll do the cervical screening register. So that's the stated reason as to why it can't be done sooner.
So, Doctor, we're basically being told it's a bunch of backroom technology, computer and databases, that is stopping us having better health services for women.
Absolutely, and this is why we've written, on several occasions actually to escalate this issue. I know most of the primary health organisations in Auckland have been, and some of the DHBs as well, have been stating that, look, from an equity point of view, it's really important to get access to this test. It does screen out the need to do a full smear test on the majority of women.
So while people may be celebrating that it's great news that this is going to get funded, it's still a couple of years, it's 2 years off. There's been delays so far, so we're probably up to between 5 and 6 years worth of delays before this actually goes live. So while you may be supportive of it being introduced, what do you think about the amount of time this is taking?
I think it has taken too long, hence why we've been agitating to have it prioritised. But having said that, the sooner the better. The really important thing is that this will open up to a large number of women who, for whatever reason, have not wanted to have a smear test done or been able to get a smear test. It's a lot less invasive. It's something that can be done in their own home and then just handed into the laboratory or to the doctor's surgery. Yes, people can come along and have it done in the surgery if they want to, but it can just be done by themselves. It's very simple. But it is important that if they test positive, or indeed if you've had an abnormal smear before, you still need to go along and have the full smear tests or colposcopy done.
When you talk about the fact that women will be able to have this test in the GP's office if they want, they can it can be a total self-test, you do it in the privacy of your own home, or you can go into the GP's office, right, and almost do this test like you would step out to do a urine test, right?
Correct.
So why can't women do that now, or can they? Right now, could you go in and ask for this test?
Technically, we could ask for an HPV sample, but it's not part of a national screening program per se. But it could be done. I think the labs would not process it currently if they had an inundation of a whole lot of tests without good clinical indication. In other words, as part of a screening program, the labs aren't funded to provide it.
Okay, so what happens in the meantime then? Because the wait is 2 years away.
In the meantime, it's really important that women still go and get a smear test done and know that they're safe in the interim. If their smears are normal, then they can leave the swabbing test for another 3 years. For anybody that's in the high-risk group, they really should go and get smeared. And very importantly, if they have had an abnormal smear before or a high-grade abnormality, those women are most at risk and they definitely need to go and see their GP or nurse and have a smear test done.
Alan, I just want to circle back to the technology. How do you view the fact that it is because of, computer setups that, again, there's delays? Is that acceptable?
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think it is acceptable. I mean, it's absolutely a safe test. It's the gold standard. We've known that now for a couple of years. New Zealand was part of the trials that looked at this, and we can have real confidence that the test is, a gold standard test to have. It certainly is preferable and cheaper and better than having a smear test done.
Well, basically what we're saying is we can't access Gold Star healthcare because we don't have good IT.
Yeah, basically as part of a national screening program, the current register cannot cope with the HPV screening program, is my understanding.
And that is ProCare Clinical Director Dr Alan Moffat. It is about 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Moriaki in Pitapita Kōrero, after the news at 6, 3 people are going into surgery tonight following a stabbing at a Countdown supermarket in Dunedin. We will have the latest. More than 20 families remain without a home after the horrific floods in Napier 6 months ago. Patience is wearing thin for some, with one family moving 8 times since the floods happened. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen visited some people who are still without a home after the downpour.
From the front of the street, Paul Matthews' house looks absolutely normal. From the back, it's a wreck. He says Fire and Emergency, Civil Defence and EQC say his house had the worst damage in the floods on the 9th of November last year.
Taking out the wash house, the bathroom, the kitchen, the outside storage shed and the outside tool shed, and all the garden and retaining walls and everything that were down here is now under 6 foot of mud.
Inside the house, it's just as bad.
The sewage and the mud have flowed through into the house. It's gone into everywhere, into the house, all over the floor, up the walls. It's now, we're 6 months after the event. Now it's been sitting here for 6 months.
For Paul, it's been a huge waiting game. Waiting for officials, waiting for reports, waiting for help that's never come.
The thing I have learnt is when you're in a catastrophe like this, there's no guidance or system provision for you who's in the middle of a catastrophe to how do you do this. You have to do it on your own and find your own way. So you become a project manager of your own catastrophe.
Freeman White spent a decade doing up his beloved turn-of-the-century villa on Napier Hill. On the day of the floods, a large slip tumbled into the back of his house, smashing into the bathroom. His family, him, his wife and 2 children, have had to move 8 times since the floods.
Because we didn't want to sign a long-term lease, it was quite difficult. Once we explained our situation, basically landlords didn't really want to know.
But the moving's not yet over. The slip's been cleared, but there's no finish date for the repairs. Despite hoping to be back in before the end of the year, that won't be the case.
Now, because the time frame's kind of been pushed out longer, we've actually got to move again. So it's been pretty disruptive, I'll have to say that.
But he's certain they'll call it home again.
The house has not moved on its foundations. The main structure of the house is fine, so yeah, it's going to live to be our family home again, which is I mean, it's probably the most important thing.
Patrice Monk is waiting for a home to be fixed in the suburb of Paramai. She remembers trying to evacuate on the day of the floods with water at her shoulder.
Once our ute left the driveway and went to the road, the tyres were not touching the ground.
She returned to find the property a complete shambles.
When I came back 2 days later, there was used period pads all in the garden that had probably overflown from the drains, or I don't know, had been flushed down the toilet at some point by somebody. And there was floating faeces from probably animals and humans.
She's been staying at the local council campground, Kennedy Park, since December, which she says isn't ideal.
It's nice for a 3-night stay, but like I said, it's not a place that you would want to stay in for 7 months or more. Like, the staff are awesome and everything, but our unit is quite small, and so, don't have the same cooking facilities as you would at your own place.
24 families, that's 42 people, remain at Kennedy Park after the floods. Napier City Council says 2 roads are still shut and steps are closed around the hill. 4 households still have portable cabins on their property supplied by the government. The floods were the most costly natural disaster for New Zealand's insurance industry last year, totalling $87.7 million so far. I ahurere mo te hōtaka o te yahiyahi ko Tom Kitchener-Ho.
The government has promised to make room in MIQ for about 2,500 more migrant workers to come into the country for seasonal horticultural work. About 500 spaces will be set aside in managed isolation hotels every fortnight for certain groups of travellers. They include about 300 RSE workers every month from June, 300 specialised construction workers between June and October, and 400 foreign students next month. There'll also be room for 100 refugees every 6 weeks from July. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the move is possible because the Trans-Tasman bubble has reduced demand on MIQ.
The last 13 months have been tough for many, but have been particularly challenging for our agriculture, horticulture and viticulture sectors. Today's decision should, as I say, see around 2,500 more RSE workers entering New Zealand and provide a boost to our rural communities and take some pressure off. These workers will be doing harvest preparation, picking autumn and summer fruit, harvesting grapes and pruning through winter.
COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says the decision was carefully balanced against the need to leave open rooms for New Zealanders to return home. The horticulture industry has been crying out for more workers without access to the usual influx from Pacific nations. A critically endangered kakapo is back on his feet after the equivalent of a minor toe amputation and a stint in a custom-made moon booty for birds. There's just over 200 of the precious flightless parrots alive. This handsome fella is called Milford. Eagle-eyed rangers were doing their regular spot health checks on the Kakapo on Whenua Hou, Codfish Island, when the team vet, Dr. Lydia Udstrom, says that Milford wasn't using one of his feet properly.
What he seems to have done is, at some point, he's damaged the nerves of that foot a bit. So the nerves are in your hand, tell your hand to open. And so because these nerves weren't functioning properly, the signal wasn't getting through, telling him to open up his foot. And so it was just always tucked in a nice little fist he'd kind of tucked his foot away at.
So what did you do? I've seen some photos of some kind of little apparatus. What should we call it? A Kakapo moon boot?
Little Kakapo moon boot, indeed. So I guess because when he came off, we were initially thinking that it was a tendon problem. And linking it most closely to something like club foot in a human. And the way they straighten those out and help those tendons to relax is they put a little special made boot on. So he got his own special kakapo-shaped little booty, and that just helped hold his foot open into a normal position. And we kept him in that while we were doing all the tests. So initially he just had blood tests to check that him and himself was all well and good. He had x-rays to see if there was anything going on with the bones of his leg at all. And then when all of that all came back clear, he actually went and had a CT scan. And that also came back with all of the different bits and pieces and the bits that make up the foot all looking good. So by working through that process, we kind of narrowed down all the options to it being, a nerve problem rather than a structural problem. And unfortunately at that point, unfortunately his little booty isn't going to do its job, because if it was a structural problem, it would have fixed it. But little booty couldn't work magic on nerves. So, we pulled it off at that point.
Did you have to do anything more for him in terms of treatment?
So the interesting thing, because of the way he was holding his foot, or his foot was holding closed, he had one of his claws on the tip of a toe was actually starting to cause a little injury on the pad of his foot. So the team at the hospital just did a tiny little amputation just to the very tip of that toe, so that claw is no longer there.
Tiny amputation, Lydia? Can you be a bit more? What do you mean by tiny amputation? And how do you do that on a little Kakapo claw?
Yeah, well, so they took the first joint. Essentially, if you looked at your finger, they took the first joint of his finger away. So that removes the nail and makes his toe a little bit shorter, but still perfectly functional. We have a couple of other Kakapo who have little bits of their toes missing from injuries over the time, and they still do brilliantly. So, just went through and took that first joint off, which means his claw is gone as well, and therefore can't cause any injury to his foot. The rest of his claws, the rest of his toes are in a abnormal, they're still in a kind of tucked in position, but he gets around brilliant with that. He was brilliant at even out-manoeuvring us sometimes when he was in hospital. So he certainly hasn't slowed him down at all.
Well, it doesn't look like he suffered that much, because he's a bit chubby, isn't he, Lydia? He looks like
Yes, absolutely. Yes. It's one of the incredible things about Kakapo. They are the heaviest parrot in the world, and nice round boy, that's for sure.
So I know all of the birds are special, but tell us what's special about Milford.
He is a particularly handsome young boy. He is really precious in that his dad is a bird called Gulliver, and it's the amazing thing with Kakapo is we know their parentage, we know their family histories really well, and so his dad Gulliver is one of only 3 chicks sired by Richard Henry, who is the only bird from Fiordland to contribute to the current population. So he carries incredibly precious genes, and he's one we're certainly very hopeful of having a good long life and making lots of babies of his own one day.
And he's pretty handsome too.
And he's very, very handsome indeed.
That was Dr. Lydia Udstrom, who's from the Kakapo, she's the team vet. And you need to go online and have a look at the pictures of him, because he is just delightful.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. A police commander has praised as heroic the bystanders who intervened to stop a multiple stabbing attack in a Dunedin supermarket this afternoon. 3 injured people in a critical condition are going into surgery this evening. Another's in a serious condition, and the alleged offender is also receiving treatment under guard in hospital. Southern District Commander Paul Basham says the customers who stepped in and detained the attacker were nothing short of heroic.
I have, before I came to speak to you this afternoon, viewed the CCTV footage, which is quite traumatic, and what I can say is that those that intervened, some of who became injured themselves, I think have acted selflessly and with great courage to prevent this man from hurting anybody else, and indeed I think they did just that.
High-profile former prisoner Arthur Taylor told Checkpoint he was about to walk into the Cumberland Street countdown to do his evening shop when police cars started arriving, with sirens going and lights flashing.
More police cars kept arriving, ambulances. They took a guy out covered in blood, carted him off somewhere. He was the offender, alleged offender, I should say, at this stage. And, it just got more hectic from there on.
Arthur Taylor says he saw 2 injured people on stretchers. The suspect is expected to be charged tonight with a minimum of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Countdown's Corporate Affairs Manager Kiri Hannafin told Checkpoint the number of cases of violence towards the chain staff has been increasing over the past 15 months. She says every day there's an assault or violence of some kind in a Countdown store. Last Thursday night, for instance, someone tried to burn down the Henderson store while staff were working in it. Nearly 2,500 more migrant workers are to be allowed into the country for seasonal horticultural work in time for next summer's harvest. 500 rooms in managed isolation hotels will be set aside every fortnight for certain groups. The Prime Minister says about 300 RSE workers will be able to come through the border every month from next month, totalling 2,400 by next March.
Entering New Zealand and provide a boost to our rural communities and take some pressure off. These workers will be doing harvest preparation, picking autumn and summer fruit, harvesting grapes and pruning through winter.
Jacinda Ardern says places will also be made available for another 240 specialised construction workers between June and October, 400 foreign students in June and 100 refugees every 6 weeks from July. A survivor of abuse in state care says the abuse suffered by many must be quantified and never denied. Tyrone Marks spent time in up to 8 institutions from the age of 8. Giving evidence to the Royal Commission of Inquiry today, he said the mental and physical scars of abuse are with survivors forever.
Some survivors will find healing in different ways, and, that's fine. But the kind of things that happened to me and many others, it's tattooed into us. It's in, we can never heal from it. It's too late.
Tyrone Marks says all the homes he was in had a level of violence that became the norm. Maritime New Zealand has ordered Kiwi Rail to pay $335,000 over an incident on an inter-islander ferry. In 2019, a crew member required surgery and 15 weeks off work after slipping on insufficient floor surfacing and breaking his femur in 2 places. $250,000 of the money will go to the Marlborough District Council to provide real-time monitoring of tides, currents and water depths. That's because of the dangers posed by sudden changes and fast tides and currents in the Sounds. Unspecified amends and costs have also been paid to the victim. It's 4 minutes past 6. The defending champions, the Central Pulse, can climb to second on the ANZ Netball Premiership tonight when they play the Northern Mystics in Wellington. The unbeaten Stars sit at the top of the table, but just 3 points separate second and sixth. The Pulse are fourth, so a Mystics win tonight could leapfrog them into second. Caleb Clark has put his hand up for selection in New Zealand's Rugby Sevens team for the Tokyo Olympics, which rules him out of the start of the All Blacks international season. Clark and Chiefs player Etene Nanai Seturo have returned to the Sevens program ahead of matches against Australia later this month and another Oceania-based tournament next month. Replacements for red-carded players and goal line dropouts are to be used in the Super Rugby Trans-Tasman competition. The captain's referral won't be used, while the Golden Point rule to break a deadlock won't be used in pool play, but will be in the final. The only chances of completing the suspended Indian Premier League now lies outside the COVID-ravaged country. The head of India's Board of Control for Cricket, former Test captain Sourav Ganguly, says it's impossible to complete the IPL in India and too early to say if another country could host. The United Arab Emirates hosted last year's tournament. And West Bromwich Albion have been relegated from football's English Premier League following a 3-1 loss to Arsenal. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Well, I'm not sure how adding more costs to business encourages them to invest in their people.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
The biggest concern is the rise of COVID-19 patients with serious symptoms. It's just hit another fresh record high today.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki and Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Generally cloudy with isolated showers, rain developing about Waitomo, Taumaranui and Taranaki tomorrow night, possibly heavy. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa partly cloudy, scattered rain in Wairarapa tomorrow. Whanganui and Taihape and Manawatu, cloudy periods with a few showers tonight, rain developing tomorrow evening. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, cloudy with occasional drizzle, rain at times tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, partly cloudy tonight, a few late showers, periods of rain tomorrow, heavy about the ranges, easing in the evening. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine with high cloud tonight, rain spreading north tomorrow, followed by showers and snow to 600 metres in the south. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, heavy at times, easing from the south tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy, drizzle at times. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. 3 people are undergoing surgery tonight after a stabbing at a Countdown supermarket in central Dunedin. One person's been arrested in relation to the stabbing attack, which happened at the Cumberland Street store about 2:30 this afternoon. Our reporter Timothy Brown is in Dunedin and joins me now. Kia ora, Timothy, what do we know about this attack?
Kia ora, Lisa. It's been described by police as a random attack. They have got one person in custody, a man who will face charges before the Dunedin District Court tomorrow. They are not seeking anyone else actively at present. They haven't told us his address, his age, any of those details, or whether they have in fact raided his address. What we do know, though, is that he entered the supermarket approximately 2:30 this afternoon. He had 2 knives on him at the time of the attack. It's unclear whether he took them with him or whether he found them within the store. And during a very brief rampage, he managed to injure 4 people, 3 of which police described as status 1, that is critically injured. They are in Dunedin Hospital at the moment and will be undergoing surgery for their injuries.
Timothy, I think you've managed to speak to some people there at the scene. What have they been saying to you?
Everyone was extremely shocked. There was a look of trauma on people's faces as they came out of the supermarket, and Countdown staff were asked not to speak to the media. However, I was able to get the thoughts and the views of a handful of them as they left. One described the supermarket workers as taking the man down and disarming him during the attack. That is where some of these injuries occurred. Within the supermarket, there is a huge mess near the pharmacy section. That's apparently where this took place. Another person I spoke to said it seemed like the man was on drugs. She said he had to be, as she motioned how he made the stabbing motions before he was disarmed by the staff. Another person I've spoken to is Aaron Hawkins. Like many in the city, he is in total shock.
This isn't the kind of thing that we expect to happen in our city or indeed anywhere in the country. Our thoughts are very much with the victims and their families at this stage, and also the staff and the customers who are witness to this. Nobody should feel like they should be hurt in their place of work or doing everyday errands like grocery shopping. But the most chilling thing about this is that it could have been any of us or our families. It's a busy central city location, and that is the most distressing thing about it at this point.
And that was the Dunedin Mayor Aaron Hawkins there, and I was just speaking a short time ago to Timothy Brown, our reporter there in Dunedin. There are calls for a policy allowing the handcuffing of prisoners before and after giving birth to be scrapped, but the Prison Officers Union says it's for the protection of staff. 2 separate reports by the Children's Commission into mothers with babies units in prison have found incidents where women were restrained at different stages of labour. Mediana Johnson has more.
About a dozen babies each year are born to mothers in prison. Reports by the Children's Commission have found some of the mothers are being restrained. A 2019 report into the Mothers with Babies unit in Auckland found prisoners were handcuffed when in labour or soon after birth in hospital. And a 2020 report into a Christchurch Mothers and Babies unit found handcuffing shortly after giving birth and while in the late stages of pregnancy. It's illegal for female prisoners to be restrained whilst giving birth, and when a medical professional says a woman is in labour, restraints must be removed. The Assistant Māori Commissioner for Children, Glenys Phillip Barbara, says it has detrimental impacts on both the mother and child.
If mum's handcuffed in that all-important time, trying to attach a baby to the breast while handcuffed, well, that's just going to interfere and all of that good skin-to-skin time that mother and baby both need.
She says handcuffing a woman at any stage of labour does not align with the corrections strategy Hōkairangi of treating all prisoners with dignity and respect. One woman in the Mothers with Babies unit in Christchurch was handcuffed for over 5 hours in the late stages of pregnancy, which resulted in bruising, while another woman was handcuffed during an ultrasound. The Commissioner's report says this was completely unacceptable and expected that during its next visit the practice would be discontinued. Former prisoner and justice reform advocate Awatea Mita says there's no need for it.
It is such a horrific and inhumane practice, and the amount of emotional harm and trauma that it causes, there's no justification for handcuffing women during when they give birth.
Prison Officers Union President Alan Whitley says the restraints are to protect staff if there is a risk of the woman lashing out.
I would say a majority of the time the prisoners will not be handcuffed, but if you've got a particularly volatile prisoner, you've got to maintain public safety as well as safety for the medical staff as well as the custodial escorting staff.
But Ms Mita says this risk does not outweigh the harm of using handcuffs on women in labour and afterwards. She agrees it runs counter to the aims of Hōkairangi.
Not only does it bring into question their credibility to deliver Hōkairangi, but also their ability to maintain the respect and dignity of the woman in their care.
She says women shouldn't be subjected to the same conditions men are in prison, as they have different offender profiles. In a statement, Corrections National Commissioner Rachel Leota says there has been at least one instance of a near-term pregnant woman escaping custody while on a hospital escort. She said work was underway to review and update policies regarding the use of restraints and the management of women during and after pregnancy. Minister for Corrections Calvin Davis did not make himself available for comment. Mo te hōtaka o te aiahi nei, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
It's 13 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government's attempted defence of its decision to restrict wage increases for public sector workers appears to be falling flat. Jacinda Ardern and Grant Robertson both fronted the media today to explain the rationale behind it. But as Harry Locke reports, public servants aren't buying it.
This is not, as has been reported, a pay freeze.
Speaking at a pre-budget announcement in Auckland, the Finance Minister was trying to clear the air. There has been a fierce backlash since it was announced last week. Public servants will have their pay restricted for the next 3 years. For those earning over $100,000, it will be a complete freeze. For those earning over $60,000, it will be a freeze unless under exceptional circumstances. For the 25% of public sector workers earning below $60,000, it will be business as usual. But Grant Robertson says that isn't the full story.
We've still got pay equity negotiations underway. We've still got the ability for people to be able to move up the bands. So there is possibilities for pay movement. Where the Public Service Commissioner has outlined his expectations, it now goes into the negotiation.
He says there are also a number of collective agreements coming up for renegotiation and will be meeting with unions this week to make his case. On TVNZ this morning, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was doing her bit to defend the policy. She says in previous economic crises, previous governments responded by capping the workforce and implementing blanket pay freezes.
We have not done that. We've said we want to keep seeing those on the lowest wages moving up because we do have very low paid workers within the public sector. We want to keep seeing those wages being lifted.
But these arguments are not being well received. The Public Service Association's national president, Aaron Pilarchuk, says pay bands only exist for professions like nursing, policing and teaching.
Many of our members working in agencies like DIA, DOC, the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Health, MFAT, don't have access to that type of a system. So what they get in collective bargaining will be all they get by way of a pay increase.
Even for the occupations where pay grades do exist, there is still annoyance. Teacher and the Auckland Regional Chair for the Post-Primary Teachers Association, Michael Cabral-Terry, says pay grades stop at grade 11 with an annual salary of $90,000. He says about 3/4 of all teachers across the country are at either the top grade or the one below.
In real terms, teachers will be experiencing pay cuts because, of course, inflation will go up, house prices will go up, costs of living will go up, food will go up, and our salaries will stay where they are on the basis of austerity.
Mr Cabral-Terry says there is also confusion. Collective agreement bargaining for teachers will go ahead next year, but he says there's little point if the government has no money to offer.
If you're going into a salary negotiation round that is going to require pay increases for people that are currently subject to a salary freeze, I can't see how it's going to work.
He says it's difficult to see how that is good faith on the behalf of the government. A nursing student about to graduate, who wished to remain anonymous, says while the measures won't affect her pay directly when she enters the workforce, there will be some indirect consequences.
The nature of our profession is that there's a strong level of teamwork involved. Within nursing, we're taught directly from our senior staff members. The senior workforce that I work with have an increasing level of burnout and fatigue and exhaustion and, I guess, hopelessness surrounding their wages, particularly because of this freeze, then I'm concerned how that will impact, our team.
Erin Pilarchuk from the PSA is worried other consequences will include staff moving to different ministries in search of a pay rise or moving to the private sector. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Harry Locke tēnei.
Systemic violence experienced during 5 years of institutional care has been outlined to the Abuse in Care Royal Commission. Tyrone Marks first came to the attention of social welfare at the age of 3. He was made a state ward, aged 9, and was in a number of boys' homes until 16. He told the inquiry violence from staff and among other boys was just the way it was. Andrew McRae reports.
Tyrone Marks spent time in up to 8 institutions. To him, they all followed a common pattern of violence, both physical, psychological and at times sexual. He says it became a normal thing.
I did see some really inappropriate behaviour by boys in terms of, others making others do sexual things that, I'm just most disgusted by.
Mr Marks says new arrivals at the homes received a welcome of sorts from the other boys.
Well, it was usually just a number of other residents there coming into your, usually at night time, throwing a blanket over you and just into it, And so that happened. It happened to me. It happened to probably just about everybody that went through there.
Lawyer Sonia Cooper read from a social welfare report from near the end of Mr Marks' time as a state ward.
With a bit of luck, he will get himself into Borstal before long, where he can be catered for.
Mr Marks says he had been lost in the system and in time did end up in Borstal. He remembers finally leaving care and turning up at his father's home.
He asked me who I was. I said, well, I think I'm your son. And he goes, oh yeah, okay, come in. I thought, yeah, here we go. I just felt so... My own father doesn't know me, so that gives you some idea how long I've been incarcerated in the system.
He says he'll keep fighting for his brother and sister survivors and everybody else until he dies.
Some survivors will find healing in different ways, and, that's fine. But, the kind of things that happened to me and many others, it's tattooed into us. It's in, we can never heal from it. It's too late. But what we do need to do is move on in terms of life still does go on.
Tyrone Marks says abuse in residential care should be quantified, not minimised and not denied. For Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
While repatriation flights from India to Australia are due to resume later this week, India remains in the midst of the world's worst COVID outbreak. The daily death toll has again passed 4,000, and for the 4th day in a row, it's recorded more than 400,000 cases. The dire situation means Indian Australians are still raising money for vital medical equipment and supporting grieving families. The ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
The coronavirus outbreak in India remains catastrophic. Yasmin Haque is UNICEF's representative in the country.
The wave is almost 4 times the size of the first wave, and the virus is spreading much faster
On an average, there were more than 4 new cases every second and more than 2 deaths every minute in the last 24 hours.
As the wait continues for the resumption of repatriation flights for Australians stuck in India, many who are watching on from afar are doing everything they can to help.
Most of us have families back home in India, and we got a first-hand account of how things are, and so we decided we had to do something. We couldn't sleep.
Anu Shivaram is from the Australian charity Vision 2020, which raises money for infrastructure projects in India and Nepal. Volunteers have spent the past fortnight raising money to buy the generators that put oxygen into cylinders for patients.
Donations came pouring in, and we've crossed $71,000. And as soon as we got the money, we started contacting agencies in India.
The money is going to accredited non-government organisations attached to hospitals in India.
It's like your home is on fire. What do? Throw whatever water you have. So that's the kind of response from most Indians. They have all wanted to do something and staying so far away, and now with the government regulation, which makes it almost impossible for us to travel, money was the only way we could reach help.
Others are mobilising to support family members here in Australia. Manpreet Singh from Sikh Volunteers Australia is one of about 200 volunteers who are supporting those in Melbourne's Indian community who are grieving the deaths of relatives back in India.
So we started to provide some counselling and also started to provide some food help to them.
The volunteers come from various religions, and the practical and moral support they're providing is in huge demand.
So first day when we started this service, we received around 15 to 20 calls.
Manpreet Singh says a lot of Indian students in Australia are here on their own and are feeling incredibly lonely as they watch India grapple with its COVID wave.
2 days ago, we met with one girl. She has whole family here, like all 3 sisters. They all are here. They are permanent citizen here. What their parents were at back in India, and they lost 6 family members with the corona, but they could not go back. So I cannot explain you like how upset were they, and they did not eat anything from last 24 hours. They were so upset.
India's neighbours are battling a new COVID-19 wave too, and with very low levels of vaccination in most South Asian countries like Sri Lanka and Nepal, organisations like UNICEF are fearing the dire situation in India will soon be felt in these countries too.
Gavin Coote reporting there. Afghan families have been holding funerals for those killed by multiple bomb attacks outside a school in Kabul. More than 60 people have now died, most of them young girls who were leaving class to go home. The school mostly serves poor families from the Hazara community, an ethnic minority who are Shia Muslims. So far, no one has taken responsibility. The Afghan government has blamed Taliban militants for the attack, but the group denies any involvement. The BBC's Sekonda Kumani reports.
The coffins kept coming throughout the day. Most of the dead, teenage girls. Their hopes and dreams buried with them. She was very intelligent and never missed a day of school, says the uncle of one 15-year-old. We buried her here today. The attack took place as pupils were making their way home. It began with a car bomb outside the school gate. 2 more explosions followed. There's still been no claim of responsibility, but many suspect the Islamic State group is behind the bloodshed. They've repeatedly targeted this minority community of Shia Hazaras in the past too. In hospital corridors, anxious families wait. Many of the victims remain in a critical condition. Tahira described the terror she witnessed.
I saw injured people being carried away. Some of them had lost their legs. Some had lost their arms. The street was covered in blood. People were crying. The situation was very bad. Parents were searching for their children.
At the scene of the attack, bloodied textbooks and abandoned school bags. Violence in Afghanistan is getting worse just as the last international troops begin to leave, and many more lives are likely to be lost.
Secunda Kamani with that report. The winning horse in America's most prestigious race, the Kentucky Derby, has failed a drugs test. Medina Spirit won on the 1st of May, giving his trainer Bob Baffert a record 7th victory in the race. But Mr Baffert revealed today that the horse tested positive for a banned substance after the race. The BBC's Mark LaBelle reports.
Here he is. Here he is, indeed. Trainer Bob Baffert parades his long-shot Kentucky Derby record-breaking winner, Medina Spirit, describing this latest twist as the biggest gut punch in racing for something he claims he didn't do.
All I can tell you is that betamethasone, even though it's an allowed drug, therapeutic medication, we did not give it. My veterinarian, nobody here.
After winning the prestigious race, Medina Spirit was found to have double the legal limit of a banned steroid that's injected into joints to reduce pain and swelling. Steroids are often given to mask an injury, as well as to have a horse run faster than it otherwise would, risking the safety of both horse and rider. Medina Spirit's high-profile trainer has paid fines before. This latest episode has left him licking his wounds.
There is definitely something wrong. Why is it happening, to me? There's problems in racing, but it's not Bob Baffert.
At stake is both the Derby title and winnings. The racecourse has banned Bob Baffert from entering any more horses while the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission investigates. If a second sample confirms the infringement, the runner-up, Mandaloon, will be declared the winner instead, barring an appeal, which could reportedly take years. Medina Spirit would then become only the third winner stripped of the title in the Derby's 147-race history. This high-profile dispute's also proving another hurdle for America's horse racing organisers, jockeying to get on the front foot over a drugs problem still saddling the sport.
And that was Mark LaBelle reporting. Just to bring you up to date on the incident, this is a serious incident at the Countdown in Cumberland Street in central Dunedin. The Southern District Commander, Superintendent Paul Basham, has put out a statement. He says they first got calls around 2:30 today. Emergency services received a number of calls reporting multiple people had received stab wounds inside the Countdown supermarket. When they arrived, the police located 4 people with serious stab-related injuries, and we know 3 of them are undergoing surgery this evening. A man was located and detained, and it was members of the public who had actually detained him. And Superintendent Basham has praised them for their bravery. He says in this statement it was a fast-moving and extremely traumatic event for every person in that supermarket. The victims who were injured, those present who tried to intervene, and those who had to flee to a place of safety. Now, the police are satisfied that they have the person who is allegedly responsible in custody. They don't appear to be looking for anyone else. The supermarket is locked down, and he said that there'll be an extensive scene examination that goes on over a period of days. It is a random attack, he says. Now, this is important and something you can help with. They're going over CCTV footage, but if you were in the area and you took footage of the incident, they would like to hear from you. If you have any information or video footage of the incident, you can get in touch with the police via 105, the 105 number. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Southern District Police Commander Paul Basham says the people who intervened in a multiple stabbing attack in a Dunedin supermarket this afternoon are heroes. 3 victims are in a critical condition and will undergo surgery in Dunedin Hospital this evening. 1 other person is in a serious condition, and the suspect is also receiving treatment under guard in hospital. Justice Reform advocate Awatea Mita has told Checkpoint the handcuffing of women before and after giving birth in prison is inhumane. Our next news and weather is at 7.
bandwidth is not fantastic. So if you're trying to watch them online, pictures go static, don't they? They're stuck in the middle of a jerk and it's like, hello.
This week on Champions of the Pacific, the Oceania Weightlifting Institute is adapting its training methods to combat COVID-19. I'm Tale Anderson.
I'm Vinnie Wiley. We speak to a rugby league trailblazer tackling gender stereotypes in Papua